Welcome to Rock the Diploma's 30-2 Approaching Part B, the dreaded reading comprehension exam session. What we're going to do in this particular session is take a look at an overview of the exam, what you can expect, what you can take in with you, and then take a peek at a whole horde of tips and tricks for how to actually write these examinations. And this is going to be paired with another session where we actually practice a reading comprehension exam, rip that thing apart, and try to rationalize everything for you. And what this should do is allow you to better understand these examinations, have more confidence, and then actually meet with much better success on your own reading comprehension exam. So stay with me. So the reading comprehension exam is worth 50% of the overall diploma mark. So it's very important that you do engage in practicing understanding of tips in order to meet with the highest degree of success on this exam. You can expect to see 70 multiple choice questions, and that's going to cover a range of genres, shorter texts and longer texts. Now, this is an assessment of your ability to read a variety of literary texts closely, and I like that they do that on the diploma exam. If you have been writing genre reading comprehension exams in class, like this one's all on short stories, this one's all on poetry or whatever, I find that students, in my experience, actually tend to do worse on those exams than they do on these exams that cover a variety of genres, because I think that with your brain able to kind of shift gears between different types of literature, I think it prevents a bit of burnout when you're writing it. So take heart from that. Now, critical reading and thinking skills, an understanding of vocabulary at grade level, an appreciation of tone and literary and rhetorical devices, an understanding of the purpose and effect of writers' choices, and an appreciation of the general universal human experience and values reflected in literature will be assessed at the level of challenge appropriate for students graduating from a 30 level English language arts class. This variety of literary texts will include the following: modern and or contemporary drama, which could include TV or radio scripts or screenplays. There will be poetry, and more than likely more than one poem throughout this diploma exam, because they're short, they're quick to read, they like to put more than one in there. There will be fiction or nonfiction readings representing a broad selection of literary texts, which could include persuasive, personal, expository, autobiographical, or biographical texts. There will be photographs and other visual texts. There will be cartoons, advertisements, or works of art. You could also see like a magazine article or something like that, which would include visuals, photographs or whatever, paired with written text. So you have to consider everything when you are reading that. You may also be required to make comparisons between thematically connected texts via linking questions, where it will say, looking at readings 1 and 2, answer the following 2 questions. And you could also be asked to explore the context within which a text was created or presented in the readings. Now, these readings will reflect the minimum 1/3 Canadian text requirement, and they will also reflect a variety of cultural perspectives, so you won't just have the same sort of voice hammering away at you through the exam. Now, the questions in this diploma exam progress through each selection in a manner intended to assist you with your reading. And for this reason, and with the inclusion of linking readings and items, you should read the passages, the texts, and answer the questions in the order in which they appear in the booklets. Now, considering those linked passages and linking questions, when you are presented with texts that are in a combination or in a sequence, you're expected to maintain a critical awareness across multiple texts. So when you're done reading one, it's not like your brain should completely purge everything you just read. They want you to still be able to have that in the back of your mind. And you can expect to have multiple readings linked together, not just one situation with linked questions. You'll probably have 2, maybe 3 situations like that throughout the diploma. So you want to stay focused. Texts may be linked to reading selections that offer interpretations, background information, or parallel thematic presentations. These linking questions will not look at completely random text. There will be similar situations or something going on. You'll see examples of that in our reading comp practice session. You may be asked to identify similar or contradictory ideas, try to identify biases that are evident in a passage, or you might be asked to assess the appropriateness of a conclusion that's drawn from the context in which the text was created, or the context created by the passages collectively. Now, in September 2010, Alberta Ed released the January 2008 Part B, the reading comp for English 30-1. And that was released for teachers to use in preparing their students for the diploma exam. And copies were sent out to the high schools directly. It was a totally legit, here you go, here is a teaching tool. And it is the best tool that we currently have for teaching reading comprehension and showing students what they can possibly expect in both 30-1 and 30-2 English. So that's the exam that we're going to be looking at in our next session. So there are a variety of types of questions, as well as sort of what they're attempting to assess with you and the purpose behind these questions. And this blueprint here just sort of shows you exactly what they're trying to do. So they have, it's a bit of a grid here. And they talk about being able to construct meaning from content and context and engaging contextual knowledge, understanding a situation behind a text in order to address questions. Also, trying to relate textual forms, elements, and techniques in order to understand the content of a text, the purpose, the authorial purpose, why was this written, as well as the intended effect. And then also to connect self, that's you, culture and milieu to text and text creators. So again, really looking at not just who you are as a person, but taking a peek at the greater situation and the scenario behind which the author actually wrote the text. And then this other side here, we've got forming literal understandings, being able to just understand what's going on, essentially, being able to infer, apply, and analyze a text. This is sort of moving towards higher level thinking, reading something and being able to infer what is being suggested here, okay? Being able to apply information, and then also analyzing, dissecting into parts, stuff that's present in the text. And then finally, being able to assess and form generalizations, and that's looking at thematic content. What is the message here that's going on? And you can see the number of items that they attempt to have in each of these sections. So just a little bit about that for you. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper in understanding how you can prepare for this diploma exam. So this examination is going to assess your critical reading and thinking skills, an understanding of vocabulary. Can you read a word and in context be able to determine what it means? Appreciating tone and literary and rhetorical devices. So this is where all of your literary devices are going to come into play. You need to understand what is a metaphor and what the effect of that can be. Looking at the understanding of the purpose and effect of authors' choices. Why is this being written? You read the text. What do you think the purpose was behind it? And what is the intended effect that that author is trying to create? And also an appreciation of human experience, and that's moving towards those general thematic sort of ideas. There are going to be questions on prose on the reading comprehension exam that focus on meanings, so definitions, right? Inferences, you read this, what can we infer? What can we sort of determine that isn't being laid out directly for us? Can you use those detective skills? And then also applying information. How might this relate to the world at large? The author's tone, the use of irony, sarcasm, satire, or the mood of the selection may pose problems for you. Try not to read on the literal level and always be looking for tone. How might somebody have been speaking this if this was being spoken out loud? What is the adjective that you would use? How does it evolve through a text? Because that will really help lead to actually understanding message. Now, when you're looking at each text, so say we're looking at text 1, the first questions for that text will generally address the beginnings of the reading, what's happening at the start, and it should alert you to important ideas or details that will help you to understand the whole. So this could ask you about a character's emotions, or the impact of the setting, the time and the place, or the atmosphere in the reading. The next questions, the middle questions for that text, will address specific elements of the selection. For example, there could be questions regarding word meanings, right? In context, this word, could best be defined as. There could be figures of speech. We could be looking at the tone, which I've said is very key, the effect of the writer's choices on reader's impression, or details about the characters, which could include character motivation or drive, behavior, relationships, attitudes, character traits, personality things, conflicts or feelings. And then the last questions for that reading often require you to consider it as a whole. For example, they could be about the main idea, the theme, the message, the controlling idea, or the writer's purpose. So there will be content-related questions for each text, and they typically deal with the answers to these types of questions. What is happening? Why is it happening? What does it all mean? And what is the purpose? So some possible purposes for why a text might be written could be just to illustrate, to make something clear by giving examples, to explain, to make something understandable, to show how something works or how it happened, just explaining it for the reader. Perhaps to analyze, to take something and dissect it into parts and then show how those parts relate to each other. Could be to question, so to bring something before the public for discussion. Why is this happening? It could be to criticize, which is sort of similar to questioning, right? To show what is wrong with something, or to show both the strong and the weak points, almost sort of like debating it. Perhaps to prove, to show that something is true by giving evidence. Possibly just persuasion, to cause someone to do or to believe something, usually by giving reasons, not just, I feel like this, but actually providing specific, significant reasons for that perspective. And then finally, just plain old entertainment, to interest, to amuse. And bear in mind that entertainment isn't always just like rolling on the floor laughing, right? It could be something that's sort of horrifying or sad or whatever. There are many different ways that we can be entertained. Now, let's look at some specific strategies that can be employed when actually writing these exams. Now, some people find it handy to read the questions for the text before reading the passage itself. And the theory behind this is that it allows them to read the passage with a more discerning eye. Knowledge of the questions that are going to be coming can direct their focus as they're reading. And then your motivation shifts from simply understanding everything going on in that text to really seeking the answers to the questions that you've read. Now, one thing I do want to mention about actually reading the questions themselves is for a variety of types of questions, you don't want to read the answers. Okay, you cover up the A, B, C, and D, and you just read the question stem. The tone on line 12 can best be defined as, okay, don't look at the answers, because what you want to do then is just take a look at line 12, figure out what in your mind, what that tone would possibly be, come up with your own answer, and then take a look at the options. And with any luck, the same word or a synonym, something very similar will be present there. And when you do that, you're eliminating the power of the distractors, because that's what they call the incorrect answers. You're eliminating the power of the distractors to bias you in the incorrect direction. So for a lot of these questions, you want to cover up those possible answers and simply read the question stem, come up with your own answer, and then you're using the skills that you've been developing throughout your school career in order to actually come up with the answer. One thing that you want to do is make sure to mark up the passage. So when you walk into the diploma exam for the part B, you cannot take any written materials in with you. You can't take a dictionary. You can't take any sort of electronic device or anything like that, right? But what you can take in is a pencil, an eraser, and a highlighter. And they're never going to reuse that diploma exam. You're allowed to write all over that thing. So as you're reading through the text, if anything seems important, you can feel free to circle it. You can underline it. You can highlight all over that thing. And that might help speed up the answering for some of the questions. Now, as you're reading each text, you should be actively reading that, which means that perhaps you've read the questions for that text already, but even if you hadn't, you should be asking yourself the following questions. So, what is the title of the work and why was it chosen? The answer to that question might immediately point to the main idea of the passage. Somebody who has written a text has put a lot of time, effort, love, blood, sweat, and tears into writing that, and they've given birth to this text, and consequently they name it. They come up with something that's important, which can be directing you towards an important symbol in that text, an important element of the character, or towards the meaning. So always consider the title. Think about the authorial motivation. Why did the author write this piece? If you can understand the purpose, you might be able to see where the passage is heading. Ask yourself what main ideas the writer might be conveying directly, like an actual sentence right there, some narration, or if it's a nonfiction piece, like a commentary or something like that, that person is speaking to you, right? Or perhaps through characters, through dialogue, imagery, etc. Now, if the author isn't speaking directly to you, then one of the characters may be the author's mouthpiece presenting that information. Ask yourself, what might be the topic sentence of the paragraph in an essay, or the subject of a stanza in a poem, or the interest of a character in a novel excerpt or a dramatic excerpt. Sometimes the main idea is not explicitly stated. It's not a sentence you can just pull out of the text and say, boom, here's the theme, right? But you have to interpret dialogue or decipher verse. Those implicit themes are the most common in literature where, and you've done this before in class, where you sit there and read something through and ask yourself, okay, what is the message? What is the theme here that the author is trying to create? Some other things to consider is, first of all, to take a look at the title. So that can tell you what the subject matter is and if the reading is an excerpt from a larger piece of work. If it is an excerpt, it'll always be like, from this, and then there will usually be a bit of a preamble sort of explaining what's going on with that text, maybe in the previous scene or earlier on in the novel. We'll see that in our practice session. And it can also have some sort of special significance. Now, title keywords. If you're looking at a poem, it might contain a word like ode, lyric, elegy, something like that. These describe the type of poem that follows. And one example is, if it's an ode, then you should take the title seriously. The author's name could also be helpful. You might have read something else by this particular person, and this author might have obsessions with similar themes, subject matter, or there might even be styles of associated works that might help understanding the piece that you're dealing with at that moment. An epigraph can sometimes also be helpful. If it's included at the very end, a little usually italicized blurb or something like that explaining what happens later on, check that out. You can also flip to the credits at the back of the readings booklet, and it will give you some information that you might possibly be able to use. Context such as whether it's from a particular anthology that's about a topic or an issue. That could be very useful. Furthermore, it'll also tell you the country of origin and the date of publication. There could be further historical, national, social, time era-ish information that could be useful for you. So looking at some more specific tips to help you meet with success on the reading comp exam, first of all, you should carefully read any introductory notes before beginning the selection. This is useful for those texts that are excerpts from larger pieces of work, and they provide very necessary information for understanding what's going on with that. Footnotes, or sometimes side notes, depending on the text, are important to help your understanding. You'll see that in the Shakespearean drama excerpts, where they have, because it's only 10 syllables per line, there's lots of room on the sides, so they tend to provide side notes for that. For the majority of text, though, they are footnotes, and that can be useful providing definitions that they're assuming you don't know, that they're not questioning you about. If there are particularly difficult allusions that they're assuming you wouldn't know, those could be provided. Also, if it's an excerpt from a larger text, say it's a modern drama piece, any characters who are present in that scene, they'll be explained in a little cast of characters at the top. However, if Billy isn't in that scene, he won't be listed in that cast of characters, but if his name is mentioned in the dialogue, they're going to have a little side note or a footnote where they explain who Billy is, his relationship to those existing characters, because otherwise you'd be pretty clueless. As I said, you can underline or highlight words and phrases for quick reference and clarity, then absolutely do it. Take in a pencil, you need a pencil, but take in a highlighter with you. Feel free to mark up that examination booklet. Always pay attention to the bold-faced words in the questions. Words like mainly, best, most, they indicate that all four choices are at least partially correct. However, only one is the most correct, and there is always a most correct answer. We'll see that when we go through our practice examination. All of those answers can easily be defended. Examine all four choices and make a judgment by choosing the best response. Always take note of the directive verbs and words in the question stem, as they can dramatically change the focus of the question and therefore the expected answer. It's absolutely key to pay attention to those. You want to pay careful attention to line references that are provided you. It may be helpful, and it's almost always helpful, to read several lines before and after those that are given in order to have a complete understanding. Again, going back to my example about the tone on line 12, well, maybe start on line 10, read through line 14. Or if it's a stanza in a poem, go ahead and start at the beginning of that stanza and finish at the end of that stanza. Establish contextual information and then go ahead and look at that specific line. Your answers should be consistent. One shouldn't contradict another. If you've said that the tone of a poem is sorrowful, then all of the responses should reflect that particular tone. Often the last questions for a selection are thematic or general, and they contain keys to the interpretation of the reading. So you want to check the previous questions and how you answered in order to be certain that your choices are consistent with the theme that you've selected. You can eliminate the answers that don't apply or seem obviously wrong. Usually there is one that should be quite obviously wrong. And in that case, you can just kind of like throw a little slash through D if that's the one. And then I think for some people, it gives them even a little bit of a psychological advantage. Even if they're baffled about the other ones, at least you're like guessing between 3 as opposed to 4. And don't change your answer unless you're certain that your first answer is incorrect. Make sure you have a valid reason for changing it, and I'm scared is not a reason, people. I have seen students in class that have come to me in tutorial sessions and they've gone over reading comp exams that they've written in class, and sometimes their marks would be 10 to 20% higher if they hadn't second guessed themselves. You can see where they've erased their original answers and then switched to something that's incorrect. And when questioned why, they're like, I don't know, I wasn't confident that day, I didn't know what to do. Well, stick with your gut unless you have a proper reason for changing. Now, if you come across one of the possible answers and it contains a word that you have no idea what it means, some big, long, sophisticated term, and you're like, what? Do not pick that answer unless by process of elimination, you can eliminate the other ones. Otherwise, it's a complete shot in the dark. But if you can make sure that those other ones aren't there, then go for it because it should be it, right? Now, if 2 or 3 items are contained in each of the 4 responses, sometimes there might be like a list of adjectives that are character traits for somebody in the text. All right, read carefully to determine that all items in the response that you are choosing actually apply to the question stem, because it's likely that most of them will in each of them, but one of them will be wrong. So here's a cute little example. The wolf in Little Red Riding Hood, which you probably have read, was both dangerous and deceitful, evil and shy, cunning and brave, courteous and affectionate. All right, so while B, C, and D contain one correct word, right? Evil, cunning, courteous, he was courteous, so please let me eat you, right? Only in A do both of those words actually apply. It's important to try to visualize what's going on. Visualize, especially when you're reading poems and when you're reading plays. Poetry is usually full of imagery, right? You want to try to picture what is being described for you visually, but of course imagery can apply to any of your senses. So you do want to consider like, what's that smell? Or how does something feel? Whatever, right? And when you're reading a play, again, try to visualize what's going on. It's a little bit harder if you're reading a Shakespearean drama excerpt because there are virtually no stage directions there. But in a modern drama excerpt, it's important to take a look at those stage directions. They'll be explaining character movement, facial expressions, body language, all those things. And it's key to read that in order to understand the text. When you're reading poetry, you want to pay close attention to punctuation, right? Don't stop at the end of every line, but you read to the end of a thought unit, which is enjambment, right? If point number 14 here is a 2-line poem, probably the world's most boring poem, do not stop at, okay? That is not a complete thought. It runs on to the next line, so that's what enjambment looks like, okay? The end of a thought unit is usually indicated by a period, a colon, a semicolon, a question mark, or an exclamation mark. So be looking for that punctuation to help you realize when a thought unit is coming to an end. Always focus on tone and attitude, all right? If you think that a writer is being serious, but the author's actually being humorous or sarcastic or ironic or something like that, then you will miss the point of the selection. So focus on tone, focus on attitude. That will absolutely be integral to thematic understanding. And you want to read each question carefully. Don't skim the questions, and we're going to see that when we look at directive verbs and phrases in the actual practice exam a little bit more. And sometimes there's like a negative word like not or the perils of or something like that in a question stem. And if you skim past that in the question stem, you are looking for the complete opposite answer that you actually need. So you don't want to just leap to a conclusion either. A, no, B, no, C. Yeah, that sounds like it. Read D, okay? And make sure that you give all 4 options a fair chance. It's important to manage your time. Yes, you've got 6 hours to write your Part B, the reading comprehension here, which is a lot of time for that. However, you don't want to sit there and just hammer through it, all 70 questions in a single little sitting there. You want to get up, you want to go to the washroom, do your business there, get water on your face, reset your body, get the blood flowing, okay? Probably a couple of times during that examination. It's the best thing for you. Sitting for that amount of time straight is not good for you. So, that being said, take a look at the questions and make sure that you've got time to stand up, to get that reset going on. Make sure that you've got time to go back through the exam if you need to, right? And just to flip through and make sure that you didn't happen to miss any of the questions or anything like that. Make a note of questions you might want to reconsider once you're complete. Now, you should always bubble in every single answer, okay? Point 20 here says if a question's too difficult, mark it and leave it for later. That means mark it. That means like throw in like a placeholder answer. Because if you skip question 19 and say that's the last question for one of the readings, you go on to the next text, you read through that, you come to actually answer the questions, you might accidentally bubble 20 in line 19 and 21 and 20, and you've got 70 questions. And when you get to the end and it's like 70 and 69, oh no, what do I do? You might not even remember where that error occurred, and even if you do, you've got all of that erasing to do. It's not going to be a healthy situation for you. So always mark it and then write somewhere in your booklet, hey, I need to come back to 19. You'll have time to do that later on. So if time permits, and it should, review your answers, but like we said before, only change your answer if you have a valid reason for doing so. You come back, you have a better understanding of it. Maybe you read the second text and it's a linking text with that other one and that gave you some sort of insight on it. That's fine. And please don't look for patterns in the answer key. All right, there aren't equal numbers of each letter or anything like that. So don't look for patterns. That is not helpful. So earlier I mentioned directive verbs and directive phrases, and it's very important to carefully read those in the question stems as they can dramatically change the answer for which you're looking in those options, A through D. So a word such as reveals, okay, is very different than a word such as foreshadows. Revealing is like something being brought out, unveiled for the reader, whereas foreshadowing is hinting at something that's going to happen later in the text. A word such as establishes, again, is sort of setting something out for us to look at, right? Whereas introduces, again, is the first time something will pop up in a text. When you take a look at the directive phrases, a phrase such as most directly, okay, will be really, really clear for the reader, whereas most frequently means that it's come up multiple times in the texts, okay? So you can have most directly reveals, and that's very different than most frequently establishes or something like that. So you should definitely take a minute and go through this entire list here, look up any words with which you're unfamiliar, and really ask yourself, what is that verb? What is that phrase really asking me? And how might it possibly change the focus of the question? So that wraps up our reading comprehension strategies, tips session. Now it's time for you to actually practice.